Hey there, and welcome back to Lunar History. Tonight, we're stepping into a world that might seem completely alien to modern dating. Victorian England in the 1850s. Now, if you think swiping right on a dating app, deciphering mixed signals, or awkward first dates is complicated, trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. Back then, romance was not just about attraction. It was a carefully choreographed dance, ruled by strict etiquette, social expectations, and family approval. Imagine living in a world where every glance, every gesture, even the tilt of your hat carried meaning. A lifted hat could speak volumes. A misplaced gift could damage your reputation. And a simple visit from a suitor was practically a full-scale examination of your character. And yet, within this rigid structure, real human emotion, subtle flirtation, and even sparks of excitement found a way to bloom. Before we dive deep into the world of corsets, afternoon teas, and carefully measured conversations, I want to take a moment to say thank you for being here. If you enjoy uncovering the strange and fascinating details of history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any future stories. I also love hearing from you, so drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's amazing to think people all over the world are cozying up to these stories, drifting off to sleep with the past coming alive around them. Now, let's set the scene. It's a chilly morning in London, 1855. There's no central heating, no instant hot water, and the stone walls of your home seem to soak up every bit of the cold. Outside, the streets are bustling, but inside, the day begins quietly, with the housemaid tending the coal fires, carrying heavy scuttles up to warm the bedrooms. Every step you take through your morning routine is deliberate. The corset squeezes your waist, the carefully arranged curls frame your face, and you prepare for a day where appearances, manners, and reputation are everything. Today, S&T, just any did S, the day a young lady might meet a suitor who could change her entire life. In Victorian England, courtship was a delicate performance. Families observed, intentions were scrutinized, and small gestures carried immense significance. The weather, the tea, even the type of flowers presented could speak louder than words. And yet, despite all these rigid rules, genuine connections were made. Hearts fluttered, subtle signals were exchanged, and love, in its careful, measured way, found a path. Exhale, take a deep breath, settle in, and prepare to step back in time. Tonight, we'll explore every layer of Victorian dating as we leave the warmth of our imagined London bedroom behind, stepping into the world of Victorian courtship. It becomes clear that dating in the 1850s was nothing short of an elaborate performance, meticulously choreographed and guided by a code of etiquette so rigid it might seem almost impossible to navigate by modern standards. In the world of Victorian England, romance was not spontaneous. It was a disciplined endeavor, a social art form governed by rules that dictated not only what you could say or do, but also when, where, and even how. Every gesture, from the subtlest lift of a hand to the placement of a teacup on the table, carried meaning, and missteps were often irreversible, capable of tarnishing a young lady's reputation or undermining a gentleman's standing in the eyes of society. Imagine, if you will, a young woman of the era, waking to the chill of a London morning, the gray light filtering through heavy curtains, and the air sharp with the bite of winter. It's a housemaid, already stirring for hours, carries coal up the narrow staircase to stoke the fires that will slowly warm the rooms, her movements deliberate and precise, for efficiency is valued above haste. Meanwhile, our young lady begins her morning preparations, each curl in her hair meticulously pinned, every ribbon perfectly aligned, the layers of her gown cascading into place with a practiced ease that belies the discomfort of the tight corset that constrains her movements and compresses her torso. This is no casual dressing. It is a ritual, an essential prelude to the social engagements that may define her future. Courtship was never a matter of fleeting attraction or casual interest. It was a careful evaluation, a series of interactions designed to reveal character, measure compatibility, and assess potential for a lifelong partnership. The first requirement for a proper introduction was a mutual acquaintance or a carefully orchestrated social event, ensuring that the young woman would never be alone with a gentleman, for propriety demanded constant oversight. A mother, aunt, or older female relative would almost always be present, observing each word, each inflection, and every subtle nuance of behavior. Even the most ordinary conversation could carry hidden implications. A compliment must be gracious, never suggestive. A question about one's health or travels could hint at curiosity or concern, but must remain within acceptable boundaries. A laugh could indicate warmth, but must never seem excessive or uncontrolled. In this environment, social intelligence was paramount, for the consequences of a misstep were serious, sometimes socially ruinous. For young men, the rules were equally stringent. A gentleman was expected to approach courtship with decorum and restraint, demonstrating respect not only for the young lady, but also for her family. He could not, under any circumstances, make a direct physical advance before engagement, and his attentions had to be carefully measured. A simple nod, a polite bow, or the offering of a modest bouquet could communicate interest without overstepping propriety. The choice of flowers was no trivial matter. Roses might suggest romantic intent. Violets indicate modesty, and sweet peas conveyed gentle affection. To send the wrong flower, or to miscalculate the timing or manner of the gesture, was to risk embarrassment or even scandal. Even the act of meeting in a drawing room or parlor was laden with significance. Furniture placement, the arrangement of chairs, and the positioning of windows and lamps were all part of a carefully considered tableau, ensuring that interactions occurred in a controlled and socially acceptable environment. Conversation flowed according to strict conventions, beginning with safe topics, whether current events, mutual acquaintances, before gradually moving toward more personal subjects, serving how a young man treated servants, responded to interruptions, or engaged with family members, offered valuable insights into his character, insights often more telling than any carefully crafted words of charm or wit. Letters played an equally critical role in Victorian courtship. Written correspondence was not only a means of communication, but also a demonstration of literacy, refinement, and emotional intelligence. The ability to craft thoughtful, well-punctuated letters was a mark of sophistication and respect, while the absence of proper even the smallest gestures, though so subtle that in our modern world they might pass unnoticed, carried immense weight in the complex landscape of Victorian courtship. For in an era where direct expression was often restrained, meaning was woven into the fabric of everyday actions, and so a single glance could speak volumes. An adjustment of posture could send a message, and the lifting of a hat could signify far more than simple politeness. Imagine, for a moment, a busy London street in the 1850s, where carriages rumbled across cobblestones, the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and the sound of vendors calling out their wares. And in that teeming mass of movement and noise, a young gentleman might spot the figure of a lady he admired, perhaps walking in the company of her mother or chaperone, and rather than approach her directly, which would have been unthinkable without proper introductions, he would simply tilt his hat in a measured, deliberate way, not too abrupt to seem overly familiar, not too casual to risk being seen as improper, but just enough to acknowledge her presence, to create a fleeting moment of recognition that could suggest admiration, respect, and the faintest glimmer of interest. The lady, equally aware of the invisible stage upon which all such interactions played out, might respond not with words, but with a carefully modulated gesture of her own, perhaps a slight lowering of her eyes in acknowledgement, a subtle turn of her head, or even the briefest moment of sustained eye contact, which, though lasting no more than a heartbeat, could resonate with layers of meaning that would be endlessly analyzed afterward. For in that society, where reputation and propriety governed so much of daily life. Tiny exchanges became a kind of coded language, one that both parties understood and yet could plausibly deny if ever questioned. A lingering glance could be described as no more than accident, a tilt of the hat excused as common courtesy. And yet, within those seemingly mundane moments lay the potential for the spark of romance. Or, at the very least, the beginnings of a delicate intrigue that might slowly, cautiously develop into something more. The significance of such gestures lay not only in their immediate effect, but in the if a single glance or the lifting of a hat could carry such profound meaning in the intricate web of Victorian courtship, then it should come as no surprise that gifts and interactions held even greater power. For in an age where reputation could be as fragile as porcelain, the exchange of even the smallest token was never merely a personal gesture, but rather a public act with consequences that could ripple through social circles, sometimes enhancing a family's standing, and at other times casting a shadow that was nearly impossible to erase. Imagine a young gentleman, earnest in his admiration, deciding to send a lady a small gift, perhaps a delicately bound book of poetry or a modest bouquet of flowers. And though his intentions might be entirely innocent, the gesture itself would be weighed carefully by the lady, her family, and even her acquaintances. For a gift could be read as a declaration of serious intent, as an attempt at intimacy, or, if misjudged, as an inappropriate presumption that risked damaging not only the lady's reputation, but also his own. Consider the flowers themselves, for Victorians delighted in the language of blossoms, each variety carrying its own hidden message, secret code that lovers and admirers used to communicate what could not be said aloud. A red rose suggested deep affection, a white lily purity, a sprig of forget-me-nots loyalty and devotion. And so a lady receiving such a bouquet could not simply place it in a vase without first considering what story those petals were meant to tell. If the flowers were deemed too bold, if the choice seemed to suggest a passion that propriety demanded be kept hidden, then whispers might spread, questioning the nature of the relationship, wondering whether something improper had occurred. And in a society where a woman's honor was paramount, such gossip could cause lasting harm. And yet, if chosen wisely, the same gift could elevate the admirer in the eyes of both the lady and her family, showing thoughtfulness, taste, and seriousness of intention, qualities highly prized in a potential match. But gifts did not always take the form of flowers or books. Sometimes there were tokens more personal still, a handkerchief embroidered with initials, a ribbon, a glove, or even a simple letter written with care. And here the stakes were higher, for to accept such an item was to tacitly acknowledge interest, to step onto the path of mutual attachment, while to reject or return, it could wound pride and close a door that might never open again. Families, ever mindful of propriety, often served as guardians in these exchanges, ensuring that our daughter did not accept something that might compromise her standing or give rise to unseemly speculation. It was not uncommon for mothers or chaperones to quietly vet the appropriateness of a gift before it ever reached the young woman's hands, for they understood too well that the world was quick to judge and slow to forgive. And then there were the interactions themselves, for the act of conversing, of sitting side by side in a parlor, of walking together, even under the careful eye of a chaperone, carried significance that extended far beyond the moment. To speak too freely might suggest intimacy, to linger too long might invite suspicion, while to appear cold or dismissive could be seen as unkind or even arrogant. Courtship in this era was thus a balancing act, one in which every word spoken and every action taken could either strengthen the delicate thread of mutual regard or risk snapping it altogether. Picture a young lady seated in a drawing room, her suitor across from her, the soft light of a late afternoon sun filtering through lace curtains, and their conversation turning upon poetry, music, or the latest novel. To those outside the room, it might appear nothing more than a polite exchange, yet to them, and to the watchful eyes of her mother nearby, it was a performance filled with coded meanings, testing compatibility, probing for sincerity, while never crossing the invisible line that propriety had drawn. One misstep could alter everything. Gentlemen who pressed too quickly, who offered a gift too lavish for the stage of their acquaintance, might be accused of impropriety, or, worse still, of attempting to purchase affection. A lady who accepted too freely without her family's oversight might be whispered about, her modesty questioned, her future prospects endangered. In the rigid social structures of Victorian England, such impressions once formed were, if gifts and interactions could so carefully shape the course of one's reputation in future, then daily life itself, especially the ritual of preparing to meet society's watchful gaze, was no less significant. For in Victorian England, appearance was never merely superficial, but rather a reflection of one's discipline, propriety, and even moral standing. And nowhere was this more evident than in the clothing women wore to step into the world, or even to sit properly in one's own drawing room while receiving visitors, required a regimen of dressing that was both exhausting and constraining, yet essential, for without it, a young lady would be considered careless, unrefined, or unworthy of admiration. At the center of this daily preparation stood the corset, that infamous garment so often spoken of in whispers today, both feared and romanticized, yet in its time regarded as indispensable. To a modern eye, it may seem almost unthinkable to voluntarily endure the squeezing of one's waist, the compression of ribs, and the rigid posture enforced by tightly laced whalebone. Yet, for the Victorian woman, it was the silent foundation upon which beauty, decorum, and social acceptability were built. The corset was not merely about creating the fashionable hourglass silhouette, it was also about discipline, for to lace oneself in was to demonstrate control over the body, to mold oneself, quite literally, into the ideal that society demanded. Imagine the scene each morning, long before a lady ever set foot in a parlor or ventured outside for a promenade. The household stirred as maids bustled about, fetching hot water, laying out garments, and preparing hairbrushes and pens, while the young woman herself stood patiently as layers of clothing were assembled piece by piece. First came the chemise, soft linen or cotton against the skin. Then the corset, stiff and unyielding, tightened gradually by another's hand, often a mother, sister, or Medici, tug on the laces, pulling the body into a shape that would satisfy fashion's demand for elegance. With every pull, breathing grew more shallow, movements more restrained, yet endurance was expected, for to complain was to appear weak in strength. In this peculiar paradox was measured by one's ability to remain silent under discomfort. The corset was followed by the crinoline or petticoats, vast layers of fabric or hoops that expanded skirts outward until they occupied nearly as much space as a small piece of furniture. Walking required practice, sitting demanded precision, and navigating doorways became almost an art form. Yet these exaggerated shapes were seen not as inconveniences, but as signs of refinement, a visible statement that the woman so dressed did not labor, did not toil in fields or factories, but instead embodied leisure and delicacy. Above these layers came gowns of silk, satin, or muslin, carefully chosen to suit the occasion, pale shades for morning visits, deeper hues for evening, and always with accessories carefully selected to harmonize with the whole. Gloves, shawls, parasols, bonnets, each added not only to the elegance, but also to the unspoken language of propriety. For bare hands or uncovered heads might suggest impropriety or carelessness. Yet beneath all the beauty and elegance lay the undeniable truth that such clothing was confining in ways both physical and emotional. The corset pressed against ribs and lungs, sometimes leaving faint bruises or dizzy spells. The weight of skirts made climbing stairs a test of endurance, and the heat of layered fabrics in summer could be stifling. Still, women endured, for to step into society improperly dressed was to risk censure, and no family wishing to see their daughter make a respectable match could allow her to neglect such expectations. Even at home, when no visitors were expected, many women continued to wear their corsets and structured clothing, for habits of posture and appearance were thought to reflect inner virtue, and slouching in loose garments might be seen as a sign of moral weakness. And so, daily preparation became its own performance, one in act. If the act of dressing, with its corsets and layered garments, was already a performance in itself, then the mornings of a Victorian woman unfolded as an even longer ritual, a series of carefully arranged steps that transformed the private self into the public figure who would be seen, judged, and remembered throughout the day. It was not enough to simply lace a corset and don a gown. The entire routine was a choreography of detail, one that required patience, precision, and the help of others, for few women of standing could manage it alone. Once the corset was tightened and the layers of skirts arranged, attention shifted to the hair, which, in Victorian society, was not merely an adornment, but a crown, an emblem of youth, health, and refinement. Long, well-kept hair was prized, and women spent considerable time maintaining it, washing with perfumed rinses when possible, brushing it until it gleamed, and then shaping it into styles that reflected both fashion and propriety. In the soft light of morning, a young lady might sit before her mirror while a maid brushed out the tangles, the strokes of the brush deliberate and rhythmic. Each movement meant not only to smooth the hair, but to signal the discipline of daily care. Styles could vary: coiled braids pinned into intricate designs, soft waves arranged with ribbons or combs, or the more severe partings that denoted seriousness of character. But no matter the fashion, the process was deliberate, for to appear in public with untidy hair was to invite whispers of negligence or even moral laxity. Cosmetics were used sparingly, for paint and powder were often associated with actresses or women of questionable reputation, yet subtle touches were permitted: a dab of rose water on the cheeks, a hint of beeswax on the lips, or the faint glow that came from careful grooming. The true aim was not to appear made up, but rather to look as though beauty itself were natural, an effortless reflection of health and virtue, even though in reality it required a great deal of effort to achieve such an illusion. While personal appearance consumed a large portion of the morning, household tasks were never far from mind, for even women of means were expected to play a role in the management of the home. After the rituals of dressing and hairstyling, a lady might join her mother or governess to review the day's responsibilities, planning meals, inspecting the household accounts, or giving instructions to servants regarding the cleaning of rooms, the tending of gardens, or the care of younger siblings. In grand households, these duties were largely supervisory, but the expectation remained that a woman should be versed in the running of a household, for one day she would carry these skills into her own marriage. To demonstrate ignorance in such matters was dangerous, for even beauty and charm could not fully compensate for the failure to manage a home with grace and efficiency. The morning hours, then, were never idle, even when they appeared leisurely from the outside. Every moment was infused with purpose, every detail laden with meaning. To brush one's hair was not simply to untangle it, but to practice discipline. To select a gown was not simply to dress, but to announce one's awareness of time, place, and occasion. To oversee household tasks was not merely to ensure cleanliness, but to show readiness for the future role of wife and mother. And through it all, the young woman was conscious that she was preparing not only for her day, but also for her reputation, which in Victorian society was built and tested anew with every passing morning. Thus, before a word was spoken to a suitor, before an admirer dared to lift his hat or glance meaningfully across a drawing room. The foundations of courtship were already being laid in the quiet hours of the morning, in the careful selection of ribbons, the ties, arrangement of curls, the faint scent of lavender water lingering in the air, in the gentle authority with which she gave her instructions to the household. Courtship, after all, did not begin with the dramatic gestures of love that novels celebrated. It began with discipline, ritual, and the silent preparation that shaped how the world would see her the moment she stepped beyond the private walls of her room. And yet, even with the elegance of polished hair and the soft sheen of carefully chosen fabrics, the daily reality of life in Victorian England was far from comfortable. For the world these women inhabited was one of constant physical endurance. The mornings might begin with layers of preparation, but once a lady stepped beyond the warmth of her bed and into the corridors of her home, she was immediately reminded of how inhospitable her surroundings could be. There was no such thing as central heating to soften the chill. Instead, the heavy stone walls of townhouses and country estates absorbed the damp air of England and held it stubbornly. Instead, even on days when fires burned in the hearth, drafts lingered in corners, seeping beneath doors and creeping through the smallest cracks in the windows. The coal fires, tended by servants from dawn until dusk, provided localized warmth, but only to those who sat close by. And even then, the heat was uneven, sometimes scalding on the face while the back remained cold, leaving the body in a constant state of tension between comfort and discomfort. A young woman moving through this environment had to learn to carry herself with composure, despite the cold that stiffened her fingers and the weight of the clothing that clung to her body. The gowns that looked so graceful in portraits and social gatherings were, in truth, far heavier than they appeared. Beneath the polished exterior of silk or velvet lay layer upon layer of undergarments, chemises, petticoats, crinolines, and, of course, the corset, all of which together created a structured silhouette admired by society, but felt by the wearer as a burden she must bear with practiced endurance. To rise from a chair meant gathering the skirts in careful handfuls so as not to trip on the fabric. To climb a staircase was to maneuver several pounds of cloth with every step. To sit properly at a tea table was to balance posture against stays so tight that breathing deeply became a luxury. Cold fingers, stiff backs, and aching shoulders became so familiar that they blended into the background of daily life. Yet, they also shaped the character of women who lived within these constraints. To endure discomfort gracefully was seen as a mark of refinement, for to complain openly was to betray weakness or vanity. Thus, women developed an ability to mask their physical trials behind calm expressions, soft smiles, and gestures so composed that outsiders might believe they lived lives of pure leisure. In truth, each day was a quiet test of resilience, an exercise in patience with the limitations imposed not only by clothing and architecture, but by the very expectations of society itself. Even the act of moving from room to room could feel like a challenge. The drawing rooms and parlors, designed for display, were often warmer than the corridors or staircases that connected them, so that each transition carried with it a small shock to the body, a reminder that comfort was fleeting and dependent on proximity to firelight. And, beyond the walls of the home, the discomforts only multiplied. Carriages were drafty, streets were damp and filled with smoke, and the outdoor air clung to garments so heavy with fabric that they absorbed the chill and carried it inside. The Victorian lady's daily routine, therefore, unfolded not in an environment of ease, but within a world where every moment of grace was earned by the steady endurance of weight, cold, and the silent acceptance of constraint. And yet, these very hardships were woven into the rhythm of life so tightly that they became part of the stage on which courtship and society unfolded. A suitor Offering his arm to guide a lady across a slippery street was not merely performing a gesture of gallantry. He was, in a very real sense, offering her relief from the burden of her attire and the danger of a fall beneath its weight. A seat offered near the fire was more than hospitality. It was an unspoken recognition of the shared battle against the chill. Even in moments of discomfort, opportunities for subtle intimacy and quiet acts of kindness emerged, making the code. If the daily discomforts of cold homes and heavy garments created the physical backdrop of Victorian life, then the realm of courtship added yet another layer of complexity. One not measured in temperature or weight, but in rules, watchful eyes, in the unspoken codes that dictated how a young man and woman might begin to know one another. For in this world, romance was never a private affair. Every meeting between a lady and her suitor was steeped in formality, carefully arranged, and almost always overseen by others who considered themselves guardians of propriety. Imagine, for a moment, a young lady sitting in the parlor of her family's home. The fire burns low in the grate, casting flickers of light across polished wood and embroidered upholstery, while the soft ticking of the mantel clock punctuates the silence. The air is thick with expectation, for this is not merely an afternoon of leisure, but a stage upon which reputations may rise or fall. When the suitor arrives, he does not stride in with casual confidence, but is announced, often by a servant, his presence formally acknowledged, as if the household itself must give approval before he crosses the threshold. The young woman's mother or aunt may sit nearby, hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes attentive, though never overtly intrusive. Her very presence is a reminder that this interaction is not simply between two people, but between two families, and by extension, two sets of social standing, wealth, and reputation. Conversations, therefore, are measured, voices softened, topics carefully chosen to reveal refinement without straying into impropriety. A gentleman might speak of books, of the weather, of recent travels, or of music, while the young lady listens with interest, her replies equally restrained, every word weighed against the possibility of being judged too bold or too reserved. Even the smallest choices during these meetings were fraught with meaning. Where one sat, how one adjusted a glove, the manner in which one accepted a cup of tea, all were subtle signals observed not only by the suitor, but by the watchful relatives who would later offer their opinions. A laugh too loud might be criticized as unladylike. A silence too long could be mistaken for disinterest, and yet an eagerness too obvious might be read as desperation. It was a delicate dance of restraint, where sincerity had to be draped in layers of composure, and where a single misstep could echo far beyond the walls of the parlor. For the suitor, too, the presence of family members was both a burden and a test. His posture, his manner of address, even the shine of his boots or the crispness of his cravat spoke to his character. For in a society where appearance and behavior were often seen as reflections of moral worth, nothing escaped notice. A gentleman who leaned too comfortably into his chair might be whispered about as lacking seriousness, while one who stiffened with nervousness might be judged as inexperienced or weak. To navigate these first encounters successfully required not just genuine interest, but a mastery of social performance, a balance of charm and restraint that could win approval without appearing contrived. And yet, beneath all this formality, the human heart still pulsed with anticipation. Behind carefully chosen words and politely folded hands, a young woman might steal a glance, brief and fleeting, to see whether her suitor's eyes lingered upon her with warmth. Gentlemen, while discussing literature or the latest concert, might catch the subtle curve of a smile that told him his presence was welcomed. Though the family sat in watchful silence, though etiquette wrapped the room like an invisible net, within those constraints small sparks of connection still managed to flicker. These formal meetings, then, were not so much about free conversation or natural discovery, but about proving the ability to endure scrutiny, while still letting glimpses of true character emerge. They were tests not only of compatibility, but of composure. Trials that measured not just affection, but the capacity to navigate society's expectations with grace. For those who succeeded, for those who managed to let kindness, intelligence, or charm shine through the veil of propriety, the reward was the possibility of further meetings, more opportunities to speak, and perhaps, in time, the slow unfolding of something deeper than formality could continue. If the first parlor visit was the stage upon which a young gentleman and lady cautiously measured their words and gestures under the scrutiny of ever-watchful relatives, then the ongoing courtship became a series of performances in which every detail, no matter how small, was examined as if it carried the weight of destiny. For, unlike in our modern age, where companionship might grow in the ease of casual meetings or the freedom of private encounters, in the Victorian world, romance unfolded under conditions that were both deliberate and intensely observed, and it was within this framework that conversation, manners, and the evaluation of character played their most crucial roles. When a young man was permitted to call again and again thereafter, he was not granted entry simply because affection stirred in his heart, but because he had shown, even in the earliest exchange, some measure of refinement, some glimmer of the qualities that might make him a suitable partner. And yet, proving oneself was not achieved through grand declarations or dramatic gestures, for such things would have been viewed as reckless and unseemly. Instead, courtship required a slower unfolding, a gradual unveiling of one's nature, conducted almost entirely through conversation, through carefully chosen words and the patience to listen. A gentleman might ask a lady about her favorite author, her thoughts on the beauty of poetry, or her opinion of a recently performed symphony. And while on the surface these questions seemed harmless, even trivial, beneath them lay a deeper purpose. Was she thoughtful in her answers, or merely rehearsed? Did she display knowledge without arrogance, gentleness without weakness? Likewise, her responses revealed much of him as well. For how attentively he listened, how respectfully he acknowledged her views, and how gracefully he shifted the subject when necessary, all betrayed the true measure of his character, far more than polished phrases alone ever could. Observation, too, extended beyond words. The very way one conducted oneself in such encounters became a silent script through which values and temperament were judged. A young woman's poise when pouring tea, the calm with which she bore the teasing of a sibling who might enter the room uninvited, or the kindness she showed to a servant who brought in a tray, all became signals as telling as any formal declaration. Likewise, a suitor's manner of rising when she entered the room, the humility with which he accepted a correction, or the warmth he expressed in speaking of his own family were all studied carefully, not only by the lady herself, but by her guardians, who quietly gathered impressions as though compiling a secret ledger. What makes this ritual so fascinating is how much weight was placed on subtlety, for character was believed to reveal itself most truly in the smallest of moments. It was not the loud proclamation of love that mattered, but the gentleness of tone when speaking of one's parents, the restraint shown when disagreeing on a subject, or the patience revealed in allowing another to finish their thought without interruption. Too many Victorians, these were not incidental details, but glimpses of the future, for they suggested how a man might behave as a husband, or how a woman might carry herself as a wife. Long after the initial shine of courtship had faded into the realities of daily married life. Of course, none of this meant that affection was absent, for within the quiet exchange of questions and answers, within the deliberate observation of manners, there often grew a sense of admiration, even of longing, though cloaked in layers of propriety. A lady might feel her heart quicken when a gentleman remembered a small detail from a past conversation, repeating it with genuine interest as though her words had mattered deeply to him. A gentleman, in turn, might find himself drawn to the brightness of her eyes when she spoke passionately of her favorite book, or to the tenderness with which she described a younger sibling. In these moments, hidden beneath the formal dance of etiquette. Affection slowly bloomed, its presence undeniable, though rarely acknowledged aloud. And yet, even as hearts stirred, the evaluation never ceased. Courtship was not simply about discovering whether two people enjoyed each other's company. It was about testing endurance, patience, and the capacity for kindness under the constraints of constant supervision. Families watched closely for signs, even as conversation and careful observation formed the backbone of Victorian courtship. Much of the true communication between a gentleman and a lady occurred not through words, but through subtle, almost imperceptible gestures, signals so delicately woven into their interactions that an untrained eye might not notice them at all. Yet for those attuned to the language of propriety, each tilt of the head, glance of the eye, or slight adjustment of gloves conveyed volumes about feelings, intentions, and admiration. In a society where direct expressions of romantic interest were considered improper or even scandalous, these nuanced movements became a secret code, a silent dialogue that allowed hearts to speak in ways that words, constrained by etiquette, could not consider. For instance, the simple act of lifting a hand to adjust a sleeve or the placement of a fan across one S-lap. To a casual observer, these were merely habitual motions, yet to a suitor who knew the subtleties of decorum, a lingering glance toward his hand or the deliberate crossing of her legs in his direction could hint at openness, curiosity, or even playful encouragement. The way she might accept his offered chair, the slight pause before returning his polite bow, the measured cadence of her laughter at a gentle gesto of these small, carefully measured gestures became a language in themselves, a way of expressing warmth, interest, or approval without violating the rigid boundaries imposed by society. Similarly, a gentleman's movements were equally significant. The way he might tilt his head while listening, the gentleness with which he placed a teacup on its saucer, the careful positioning of his walking stick, or the subtle adjustment of his cravat. These were not idle habits, but conscious or unconscious demonstrations of grace. Beyond the subtle gestures and careful conversation that defined private interactions between a gentleman and a lady, Victorian courtship extended into the structured social world of visits, tea parties, and the so-called weather calls, formal, often ritualized gatherings designed not merely to entertain, but to allow families and prospective partners to evaluate one another under the watchful eyes of society. These visits were far more than casual social calls, were, in essence, examinations of character, taste, and comportment. And they required the participants to navigate an intricate web of expectations with precision, great grace, and careful attention to every detail. Picture a late afternoon in a well-appointed London parlor, where sunlight filters through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on polished wood floors. A young lady sits poised on the edge of a settee, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a faint, composed smile on her face, while the gentle hum of conversation drifts from other parts of the house. When the bell announces the arrival of a visitor, there is a flurry of subtle preparation, the adjustment of a ribbon, the smoothing of a skirt, careful inhalation of lavender or rosewater from a nearby scent bottle, and the final arrangement of hair to ensure no stray curl threatens to betray distraction or anxiety. The gentleman, bowing with quiet formality, enters the parlor accompanied, perhaps, by a chaperone or his own family member, and the dance of social ritual begins. Tea is poured with deliberate care, cups are accepted and returned with precision, and conversation flows along topics that allow glimpses of intellect, refinement, and temperament while maintaining the strict boundaries of propriety. During these visits, nothing is accidental. The timing of a laugh, the ease with which a guest navigates the room, the attentiveness shown to elders or servant soul contribute to the subtle calculus by which compatibility is measured. Families, in particular, are keen observers, noting how their daughter responds to questions, how she regards her suitor, and even how he behaves when small mishaps occur, such as a clattering teacup or an unexpected interruption. Every interaction becomes a piece of evidence, a puzzle that must be interpreted with care. Whether calls named for their origins in the idea of checking the climate of compatibility were particularly structured. They might last precisely an hour, with tea and light refreshments served, had every participant aware of the invisible clock that dictated how long politeness could be maintained without overstepping social bounds. During these calls, a young lady was expected to display not only charm but discernment, listening carefully to her visitor's words, observing his manners, and weighing the suitability of his character for the long-term prospects of marriage. Similarly, the gentleman was tested in his ability to navigate a foreign domestic space with tact, to respond to social cues, and to show attentiveness to the household itself. So, from acknowledging the servant's presence to demonstrating respect for the lady's family. Tea parties, too, functioned as arenas for measured interaction. They offered opportunities for shared conversation in a slightly less formal setting, allowing participants to observe each other's reactions to social nuances, wit, and casual discourse. Here, laughter could be light and spontaneous, gestures could be softer, and small hints of personality might emerge in ways that a rigid parlor meeting could not reveal. Yet, even in these lighter moments, the undercurrent of evaluation persisted. Nothing was left to chance, for reputation and propriety demanded that, amid the polished rituals of tea parties and carefully orchestrated visits, conversation became the true instrument through which hearts, minds, and intentions were revealed. For in Victorian courtship, discussion was not merely a social nicety, but a precise mechanism by which compatibility was gauged, character discerned, and the foundation for a possible future laid. These exchanges were never casual. They were deliberate and purposeful, designed to illuminate not only the refinement and grace of the participants, but also the depth of their upbringing, scope of their education, and the vision each held for what their lives might become. A gentleman might speak carefully of his own family, recounting the values instilled in him from childhood, describing lessons learned under the watchful eye of a father or the gentle guidance of a mother, and subtly revealing how these influences shaped his understanding of responsibility, honor, and respect. He might discuss his education, not merely to display erudition, but to demonstrate diligence, curiosity, and the intellectual rigor that would mark him as a capable provider and partner, someone whose mind could match the social and practical demands of adult life. Equally, a young lady was expected to convey, with equal subtlety and discretion, sense of the life she had been raised to lead, the studies she had pursued, the accomplishments she had cultivated, and the moral and social principles her family had imparted. These conversations, though bounded by decorum, were opportunities to demonstrate intellect, taste, and character, while allowing the suitor to assess qualities that would be essential not only in a wife, but in a companion. In the delicate theater of Victorian courtship, where words and gestures were meticulously measured, and every glance or phrase carried weight, perhaps no aspect revealed more about a person's true character than the manner in which they treated those often invisible yet essential figures of daily life, the servants who maintained the household and the parents who bore the dual roles of guardians and evaluators. While a polished conversation or a clever remark could be rehearsed, and even subtle signals of interest carefully controlled, the interactions a suitor displayed toward those of different social standing were far harder to disguise, and thus became the most reliable mirror of temperament, empathy, and moral fiber. Imagine a young lady seated in the parlor, her hands resting lightly on her lap, observing quietly as a visitor enters the room. It is not merely his words that she registers, but how he greets the maid who carries the tea, the warmth or lack thereof which he acknowledges her presence, and the ease with which he responds to her instructions or slight inconveniences. Does he bend slightly to offer a polite nod and a few courteous words, recognizing the value of her labor, or does he allow impatience, condescension, or distraction to creep into his posture, tone, or glance. These seemingly minor actions are amplified by the scrutiny of the lady, her family, and even the household staff themselves, for in this era, the measure of a gentleman was often inseparable from his respect for all those around him, regardless of rank. Parents, too, served as both guides and mirrors. Their presence a constant reminder that behavior could not be cultivated solely for personal display. The way a suitor addressed a father, whether he approached with deference without compromising his own dignity, whether he engaged with thoughtful questions or demonstrated attentiveness without, in the intricate and delicately choreographed dance of Victorian courtship, where words were measured, gestures scrutinized, and propriety maintained at every turn, the giving of small, tangible tokens of affection emerged as a profoundly meaningful method of expressing sentiment, a silent language through which emotion could be conveyed without violating the rigid social codes that governed interaction between men and women. These gifts, modest, yet laden with intention, served as bridges between hearts, subtle declarations of interest and admiration that allowed intimacy to flourish within the careful boundaries of etiquette. Unlike the grand gestures of later eras or the overt displays of affection considered acceptable in modern times, each item chosen carried layers of significance, and the thoughtfulness with which it was selected, presented, and received was scrutinized as closely as any conversation or glance. Imagine a gentleman approaching a young lady on a crisp afternoon, carrying a small bouquet of freshly gathered flowers, the blooms chosen not merely for their beauty, but for the meanings they conveyed. Sweet peas might speak of delicate pleasure and thoughtfulness, violets of modesty and faithfulness, and each flower became a coded message, a whisper of feelings that could not yet be voiced aloud. As he extended the bundle with a polite bow, the lady accepted them with composure, lifting each blossom to her face, inhaling the fragrance, and allowing the subtle exchange to communicate mutual regard. In that fleeting moment, emotions traveled silently between them, each party interpreting the nuances of posture, expression, and tone to understand intentions that were. In Victorian courtship, the act of giving a gift was far more than a mere token of thoughtfulness. It was a carefully calculated gesture, a nuanced language in which the intentions, sensibilities, social awareness of both giver and receiver were delicately encoded. Each item selected carried layers of meaning, symbolic weight, in the subtle expectation that it would communicate affection, regard, or admiration without transgressing the rigid codes of propriety that defined interactions between men and women of the era. To present a gift was to navigate a labyrinth of social rules, where even the smallest misstep, a flower too vibrant, a piece of jewelry too costly, or a note too effusive, could be interpreted as forwardness or impropriety, potentially casting shadows on one's reputation and jeopardizing the careful progress of a courtship meticulously cultivated over weeks or months of observation, conversation, and shared ritual. Imagine a young gentleman contemplating a gift for his intended, perhaps a single stem of a violet or a delicate sprig of sweet peas, chosen not only for their natural beauty, but for the meanings they carried in the silent lexicon of flowers. It's a language understood by those who had been educated in the subtleties of social codes and domestic refinement. The violet spoke of modesty, devotion, and fidelity. The sweet peas suggested delicate pleasure, thoughtful attention, and an appreciation of quiet elegance. In selecting such a bloom, he demonstrated not only taste, but discernment and respect for propriety, acknowledging the boundaries imposed by society while simultaneously expressing his personal regard. The timing of the offering, the manner in which it was handed across a polished tea table or left discreetly upon a writing desk, and the brief, graceful words accompanying it all became part of the choreography that transformed a simple gift into a meaningful dialogue, allowing the heart to speak where words might have been censored. Even more intimate tokens, such as a carefully preserved lock of hair or a small portrait, were imbued with significance precisely because they had to be presented in a way that adhered to decorum. A lock of hair, gently tucked into a locket or woven into a piece of jewelry, was a symbol of connection and trust, but it had to be given with subtlety and discretion to avoid any suggestion of impropriety. Similarly, a miniature portrait, meticulously posed and framed, was not merely an image, but a declaration of esteem, a tangible reminder of presence and attention, a bridge across the distances imposed by etiquette and social expectations. The careful presentation of these items communicated not just affection, but judgment, discernment, and the capacity to respect the delicate moral and social balance required by Victorian society. It was not only the gifts themselves, but the entire context surrounding their exchange that carried meaning. Who was present, the formality of the moment, the words spoken, and the gestures that accompanied the offering wall were interpreted for subtle cues of sincerity, restraint, and character. A lady receiving such a token might respond with a gentle incline of her head, a quiet expression of gratitude, or a note of acknowledgement that was measured and refined, ensuring that her own behavior conformed to social expectation while signaling her reception of the sentiment. In turn, the gentleman would observe these reactions carefully, reading between lines, inferring feelings, engaging the appropriateness of his actions, understanding that every exchange was simultaneously a lesson in social navigation and a test of mutual understanding. Thus, gifts in Victorian courtship were never simple objects. They were symbolic gestures, deliberate instruments of emotional expression, and vehicles for demonstrating discernment, respect, and sensitivity. Each offering had to honor the conventions of propriety, reflect personal thoughtfulness, and carry a meaning that could be understood without words, creating a silent dialogue in which hearts spoke with subtlety and intention. In this way, the exchange of tokens became both an art and a science, a delicate balancing act in which meaning, morality, and etiquette intertwined, allowing affection to grow steadily and safely within the socially sanctioned bounds that governed the lives of young men and women in the intricate dance of Victorian romance. As the delicate ritual of gift-giving and subtle communication progressed, there came a moment in Victorian courtship that carried a weight far heavier than any bloom, locket, or photograph could bear: the formal proposal. Unlike the casual or spontaneous declarations of affection that might occur in later centuries, a proposal in the 1850s was an event imbued with profound significance, not merely romantic, but legal, social, and deeply binding, particularly for the woman who would be asked to accept it. This was a society in which marriage was far more than an emotional union. It was a contract, a deliberate merging of property, social standing, and familial obligations, and the act of saying yes transformed a young lady's life in ways that extended far beyond the emotional sphere into matters of law, economy, and social expectation. Imagine the scene: the suitor, having carefully observed every nuance of the lady's character, tasted the waters of mutual regard through conversation, gestures, and exchange tokens, now takes a decisive step. He approaches, perhaps with a quiet dignity that masks the nervousness beneath, bearing a small, carefully chosen ring, modest, elegant, laden with symbolic significance, seated in the parlor, which has been arranged with thoughtful attention to propriety. He kneels or presents the item in a gesture that is both humble and ceremonious. Every detail matters: the timing, the positioning of the furniture, the presence of family members who may witness the exchange, the measured words that accompany the proposal, and the tone in which they are spoken. Each element reinforces the gravity of the moment, conveying that this is not merely a sentimental plea, but a formal request that carries consequences for the rest of the woman's life. For the young lady, the decision to accept is never taken lightly. Beyond the fluttering of the heart or the warmth of affection lies the full weight of Victorian law and custom. Once she agrees, she enters into a legal and social contract in which her property and future autonomy are effectively subsumed into that of her husband. Her money, possessions, and legal identity will, in most cases, become intertwined with his, and her social standing in daily life will now be inseparable from his family, his career, and the expectations of the wider social network. In addition, the choice carries the silent acknowledgement that children, domestic responsibilities, and household management will fall squarely upon her shoulders, making the engagement a careful negotiation of both desire and duty. It is an act that demands not only emotional readiness, but also maturity, prudence, and an acute awareness of the societal framework within which she exists. This seriousness imbued even the smallest gestures surrounding the proposal with extraordinary significance. The choice of ring, often modest, yet symbolically rich, communicated intentions that were pure, deliberate, and socially acceptable. The posture, glances, and words conveyed sincerity, respect, and understanding of the obligations being undertaken. Any misstep, a gesture too casual, a word too bold, hesitation misinterpreted could introduce doubt, discomfort, or even scandal, emphasizing how meticulously these events were once the solemn and carefully weighed act of engagement had been undertaken. The rigid boundaries of Victorian courtship began to relax ever so slightly, creating precious spaces where intimacy, though still measured and socially sanctioned, could begin to flourish in ways previously unattainable. Whereas earlier interactions had been dominated by formal conversation, observation of manners, and symbolic exchanges of gifts, the engagement permitted gestures that were both tender and meaningful, small yet revolutionary in their significance. A lady might now allow her hand to rest lightly in her S, held for a brief moment under the watchful eye of a parent or chaperone, or perhaps share a quiet stroll through a garden or along a tree-lined avenue, where their words could flow with greater freedom and their mutual affection could be expressed through fleeting touches and gentle glances that had previously been forbidden. These moments, seemingly modest to the modern observer, were in fact extraordinary in the context of the era, and the participants approached them with a blend of eagerness, nervousness, and conscientious restraint. The young lady, previously trained to measure every syllable and control every expression, now found herself able to relax slightly, allowing warmth and subtle humor to color her speech and the natural curve of a smile to brighten her countenance. The gentleman, equally aware of social conventions, learned to convey tenderness and admiration without overstepping the delicate boundaries imposed by propriety, mastering the art of attentive conversation, thoughtful gesture, and quiet observation. Each encounter became a delicate choreography, where the careful negotiation of space, touch, and tone transformed a simple walk, a shared. As the engagement matured and the young couple navigated the delicate dance of emerging intimacy, the channels of communication expanded beyond the fleeting touches and carefully observed gestures that characterize supervised meetings, and they discovered the profound power of letters and private conversations as vehicles for expressing thoughts, emotions, and reflections that could not yet safely emerge in public. In an era where face-to-face interaction was constantly regulated by etiquette, parental supervision, and social expectation, the written word became a sanctuary of sincerity, a medium in which the nuances of affection, curiosity, and personal insight could be shared without fear of censure, misinterpretation, or social impropriety. Each letter, penned with care in the quiet of a candlelit room or at a polished writing desk, was meticulously crafted, reflecting not only the intelligence and sensibilities of the author, but also an acute awareness of the moral and social standards of the time. Imagine the scene. A young lady, seated near a sunlit window, the afternoon light filtering through lace curtains and casting delicate patterns across the pages of her journal. dips a quill into the inkwell, her hand steady, yet tinged with nervous excitement as she composes a letter to her. Her words are measured, each sentence honed for elegance and clarity, yet within the refined prose. Subtle warmth and candid emotion emerge her thoughts on the day's activities, observations of household occurrences, reflections on shared conversations, and quiet expressions of her anticipation for their next encounter. The letter becomes more than a mere record of events. It is a bridge spanning the physical distance and social constraints that separate them, allowing her to understand her character, her temperament, and her feelings with a depth that casual conversation could not achieve. Likewise, the gentleman engages in the same artful correspondence, crafting letters that reveal the richness of his experiences, his contemplations, and his growing admiration. He may recount anecdotes from his daily life, reflections on readings or social encounters, or musings on philosophical, moral, or practical subjects that reveal his intellect, sensitivity, and values. Within the measured yet heartfelt sentences, he conveys not only affection, but the attentiveness, patience, and understanding that society and courtship demand, allowing the lady to assess his character, consistency, and capacity for empathy. In this way, letters become a mirror, reflecting the inner life of each participant, while simultaneously serving as a medium for subtle emotional instruction, mutual reassurance, and the cultivation of trust. Personal conversations, when they occurred under acceptable circumstances, were equally transformative. Even brief moments away from the formal presence of family or chaperones, perhaps during a quiet walk in the garden, a shared view of the evening sky, or a seated pause in the drawing room while a parent attends to other matters, allowed for the exchange of thoughts, hopes, and concerns that could not be safely voiced in public. In these interactions, young couples develop the ability to articulate feelings with tact, to interpret nuance in tone, expression, and gesture, and to deepen the understanding of one another's values, fears, and aspirations. With the wedding vows spoken, the delicate choreography of courtship and engagement gradually gave way to the daily realities of married life, and the young couple stepped into a world that demanded not only affection, but an extraordinary degree of diligence, adaptability, and attention to social expectation. In Victorian society, the transition from engaged pair to husband and wife was far more than a symbolic change of status. It marked the assumption of responsibilities that extended beyond personal comfort or private emotion into the intricate orchestration of a household, the management of servants, and the careful navigation of social obligations that could affect not only one's reputation, but also the standing of the entire family. For the newlywed woman, every day became an exercise in balancing domestic duties with social grace, an ongoing performance in which her attentiveness, organization, and awareness of propriety were continuously tested, honed, and displayed. Morning routines, once designed primarily to prepare for social visits or formal encounters, now expanded to encompass the management of household affairs, overseeing meals, directing the work of maids and cooks, arranging linens and furnishings, and ensuring that every aspect of domestic life reflected the standards expected of a well-run home. Even seemingly mundane tasks, such as supervising the cleaning of floors, the lighting of fires in cold rooms, or the arrangement of flowers and decorative objects, carried significance as expressions of taste, order, and competence. Meanwhile, the husband, though often engaged in professional duties outside the home, relied upon the smooth operation of the household to support his career, social engagements, and family obligations, making the wife's role in domestic management both vital and inseparable from the broader success of their shared life. Social expectations extended far beyond the walls of the home, and the couple quickly learned that reputation was maintained not solely through personal conduct, but through the careful execution of ceremonies, dinners, and visits that reinforced their status and reflected favorably upon their family connections. Hosting guests required meticulous planning, from arranging the seating and timing of meals to ensuring that conversations flowed smoothly, that topics were appropriate, and that everyone present felt both welcomed and observed according to societal standards. Attendance at balls, church functions, and charitable gatherings demanded precise adherence to decorum, including the choice of attire, the composition of conversation, and the delicate navigation of flirtation and politeness. Every interaction, however seemingly minor, was a performance in which the couple demonstrated not only refinement but unity, ensuring that both their personal bond and social standing were reinforced through visible evidence of propriety, attentiveness, and mutual support. Amid this structured daily life, the early days of marriage were also filled with intimate discoveries, the quiet moments in which the private character of each partner became evident and the subtle rhythms of domestic companionship were established. The wife learned her husband's preferences, his morning routines, favorite foods, moods during particular times of day, and habits of thought and speech, while he, in turn, observed her strengths. As the daily rhythms of household management and social obligation settled into a steady cadence, a more intimate and profoundly personal dimension of married life began to unfold, revealing that the true depth of partnership extended far beyond the meticulous coordination of domestic duties or the careful observance of social expectation. In the Victorian home, where propriety constrained spontaneous displays of affection and the public performance of emotion was always measured, physical intimacy developed gradually, not as an immediate or unrestrained expression of desire, but as a slow, deliberate negotiation of trust, patience, and mutual understanding. Every touch, glance, or shared moment was layered with significance, allowing the couple to explore and establish the boundaries of comfort, affection, and emotional responsiveness in a manner that was at once careful and profoundly meaningful. Consider the small, seemingly mundane moments in which this intimacy quietly emerged, sitting side by side at a table while the wife engaged in embroidery, the husband reading aloud from a newspaper, their hands occasionally brushing, each brief contact accompanied by an awareness of propriety, yet imbued with the silent thrill of closeness. These moments, though understated, carried the weight of emotional revelation. Couple learned to recognize subtle cues, the soft tightening of a hand, a fleeting expression, a deliberate pause in speech that conveyed vulnerability, comfort, or anticipation. And through these observations, they cultivated empathy and understanding. In this measured progression, the physical and emotional aspects of intimacy were inseparable. As the body learned to respond with gentleness and attentiveness, so too did the heart, and as emotional bonds strengthened and physical intimacy settled into a steady rhythm of mutual understanding, the realities of married life expanded beyond personal connection into the broader and often more demanding spheres of practical responsibility, career adaptation, and the careful, sometimes unpredictable, realm of child-rearing. In Victorian society, the home was both a sanctuary and a stage, and the success of a marriage was measured as much by the efficiency, harmony, and social propriety of the household as by the warmth of private affection. Each spouse brought to the partnership a set of expectations, habits, and ambitions that required negotiation, compromise, and shared effort. And the couple quickly learned that effective collaboration was essential not only for domestic tranquility, but also for maintaining social standing, supporting professional endeavors, and preparing the household for the arrival of children. Daily life, once dominated by social visits and carefully structured routines, now became an intricate balancing act in which domestic responsibilities, financial considerations, and long-term planning converged. The husband, often engaged in his profession, whether in business, law, or civil servicer, relied on the smooth functioning of the household to support both his work and his social obligations. The wife, meanwhile, coordinated the activities of servants, managed the household budget, ensured that meals were prepared and served with precision, and maintained the order and presentation of the home, Yet these tasks were never undertaken mechanically. Each decision carried layers of significance, from the choice of furniture arrangement to the manner in which guests were received, reflecting both taste and social competence. In this way, the practical matters of household management became a collaborative enterprise in which the couple learned to negotiate priorities, communicate expectations, and support one another in the shared goal of maintaining a well-run, respectable home. As their lives became more intertwined, career adjustments often required careful consideration and discussion. The husband's professional obligations might dictate relocations, long hours, or periods of stress and travel. And the wife's role was to provide continuity, stability, and counsel within the domestic sphere. She became a partner not only in managing the household, but also in maintaining correspondence with family, coordinating social connections, and offering guidance on decisions that might impact both social standing and financial stability. In turn, the husband needed to respect and accommodate her insights and expertise, recognizing that the efficiency and harmony of the home were inseparable from the well-being of the family and the success of his career. Through repeated negotiation, shared problem-solving, and patient attention to each other's perspectives, the couple developed a partnership that was both practical and emotionally resonant, combining efficiency with empathy, foresight with sensitivity, and authority with mutual respect. Child-rearing added yet another dimension to this evolving partnership, introducing new challenges, joys, and responsibilities that demanded both patience and creativity. From the earliest moments of infancy, each spouse played a complementary role in ensuring the health, development, and moral education of their children, balancing the demands of feeding, hygiene, sleep with lessons in discipline, manners, and virtue that reflected both family values and societal expectations. The arrival of a child often transformed routines, requiring adjustments in schedules, delegation of domestic tasks, and the creation of nurturing environments that supported both parent and child. Through shared effort in these tasks, the couple not only strengthened their own relationship, but also modeled cooperation, attentiveness, and moral guidance for the next generation, recognizing that the cultivation of character, resilience, and empathy in their children was inseparable from the stability, affection, and organization of the household. Even the small, everyday negotiations deciding who would rise early to tend to a crying infant, planning meals to accommodate dietary needs, or addressing the inevitable quarrels and accidents of childhood became opportunities for the couple to reinforce communication, patience, and mutual understanding. Each success, each carefully coordinated solution, each tender response to a child's needs contributed to a growing confidence in their shared capabilities, transforming the domestic sphere into a laboratory for problem-solving, emotional attunement, and the deepening of partnership. In this way, the early years of family life were a crucible in which practical skill, emotional intelligence, and moral guidance were simultaneously exercised and refined, shaping a marriage that was resilient, collaborative, and profoundly interconnected with both social expectation and personal fulfillment. Through this intricate interplay of domestic management, career coordination, and child rearing, Victorian couples cultivated a form of partnership that was deliberate, attentive, and deeply interdependent, recognizing that the success of their union and the welfare of the family they nurtured depended on the consistent, thoughtful, and compassionate engagement of both husband and wife in every aspect of daily life. In this careful balancing act, love and duty intertwined seamlessly, creating a domestic reality that was as challenging as it was rewarding, and as socially necessary as it was personally transformative. Looking back on the intricacies of Victorian courtship, it becomes strikingly clear that the elaborate systems of etiquette, observation, and deliberate pacing were not merely arbitrary social formalities, but rather carefully constructed mechanisms designed to foster genuine understanding and thoughtful evaluation of compatibility between prospective partners. In an age when marriages carried profound legal, financial, and social consequences, the deliberate structure of courtship, whether through formal visits, supervised conversations, letter writing, or the exchange of symbolic tokens, served as both a protective framework and a guided apprenticeship in the art of partnership, allowing individuals to gradually learn about each other's character, temperament, and values before committing to a lifelong union. It's the meticulous attention to every gesture, word, and interaction, while at times exhausting or overly rigid by modern standards, ensured that decisions regarding marriage were informed not merely by fleeting emotion or superficial attraction, but by a layered understanding of mutual respect, compatibility, practical readiness for the responsibilities of shared life. In this context, every seemingly minor action, how a gentleman spoke to his host, how a lady acknowledged a servant, or the way each responded to unexpected circumstances, was laden with significance, revealing insights into patience, empathy, and moral integrity. The careful observation of these details allowed both men and women to make informed judgments about the potential for harmonious partnership, fostering discernment and encouraging the cultivation of emotional intelligence. Long before the notion of self-reflection and interpersonal awareness became widely recognized as vital to successful relationships, it was a world in which nothing was left to chance, where compatibility was not merely assumed, but actively tested, examined, and confirmed through the deliberate choreography of social, ritual, and personal interaction. And in doing so, it encouraged individuals to invest in the slow and intentional development of trust, understanding, and mutual regard. Yet beyond the practical and social dimensions, Victorian courtship also cultivated the subtle art of emotional intimacy, allowing couples to develop patience, attentiveness, and nuanced communication skills. Letters became vessels of expression, permitting reflections, hopes, and private thoughts to be shared without fear of immediate judgment, while carefully monitored conversations allowed partners to explore emotional contours in a context both safe and socially sanctioned. Small gestures, exchanged gifts, and private acts of kindness created a language of care and affection that, though restrained, was deeply meaningful and built a foundation for enduring partnership. This deliberate pace, though sometimes frustrating by modern standards, allowed couples to know each other in ways that transcended superficial attraction, creating a sense of shared understanding, empathy, and mutual respect that became the bedrock of marital life. Even as modern romance often emphasizes spontaneity, passion, and instant gratification, the lessons of Victorian courtship remain strikingly relevant. The period teaches the value of observation, reflection, deliberate decision-making in choosing a partner, demonstrating that the slow cultivation of trust, understanding, and emotional attunement can yield relationships grounded not only in affection, but also in practical wisdom, compatibility, and resilience, by fostering careful evaluation of character and priorities before commitment. The structured rituals of courtship allowed individuals to enter marriage with a clear understanding of both the joys and responsibilities that lay ahead, cultivating a partnership that could weather the complexities of daily life, social expectations, and shared challenges with grace and stability. In reflecting on these practices, it becomes evident that Victorian courtship was more than a historical curiosity. It was a sophisticated system that encouraged introspection, attentive communication, and the patient nurturing of emotional bonds, all within the strictures of a society deeply concerned with propriety and reputation. The deliberate nature of courtship allowed couples to build a foundation of trust and understanding, ensuring that marriage was approached not as a leap into the unknown, but as a carefully considered union, forged from knowledge, respect, and a shared vision for the future. In this light, the lessons of Victorian dating offer timeless insights into the importance of intentionality, attentiveness, and mutual respect, demonstrating that while the forms and rituals may change over time, the principles that underpin enduring relationships, careful evaluation, empathy, and deliberate cultivation of connection remain as vital now as they were in the quiet parlors and candlelit drawing rooms of the 1850s. Beyond the carefully orchestrated dance of courtship, Victorian marriage demanded a level of preparation that extended far deeper than mere ceremony or celebration, encompassing a broad spectrum of social, legal, and emotional responsibilities that would shape every aspect of daily life for both husband and wife. The decision to marry was never taken lightly, for it carried tangible legal consequences. Property, finances, and even personal autonomy were profoundly affected by the union, particularly for women whose legal identity and economic independence were largely subsumed under that of their husbands. In this context, marriage required forethought and a careful consideration of the implications that extended well beyond romantic inclination, demanding that both partners approach the commitment with awareness, prudence, and a clear understanding of the responsibilities that awaited them. Every step of preparation, from the selection of attire to the arrangement of the household, from the management of family expectations to the careful negotiation of social networks, was imbued with weight, as the couple anticipated not only the joys of shared life, but also the intricate labor, sacrifices, and moral attentiveness it would entail. Social preparation alone could be a full-time endeavor. Families, friends, and acquaintances were closely attuned to appearances, propriety, and reputation, and the couple's actions were continuously interpreted as reflections of character, upbringing, and social competence. Hosting events, receiving visitors, and navigating the dense web of etiquette that governed greetings, conversation, and even the placement of furniture required meticulous planning, thoughtful execution, and mutual coordination. In Victorian society, such displays were not superficial. They signified the couple's ability to maintain a household that embodied order, refinement, and respectability, qualities essential both for social acceptance and for the establishment of enduring domestic harmony. Every decision, from the timing of a tea service to the careful supervision of staff, was laden with significance, teaching both partners the delicate art of managing relationships, anticipating needs, and responding with both discretion and attentiveness. Legal preparation, particularly for the bride, carried profound implications. Engagement and subsequent marriage involved contracts of property, inheritance, and familial obligation, and women were expected to understand, accept, and adapt to the legal transition that marriage entailed. The transfer of property rights, the merging of financial resources, and the alignment of obligations to extended family members all demanded foresight, careful communication, and a thorough comprehension of the responsibilities now entwined with the legal identity of the household. Within these frameworks, the wife's role in managing domestic and financial matters was not merely a private concern. It was a demonstration of competence, prudence, and the capacity to uphold both family and societal expectations. Every ledger kept, every purchase supervised, and every household decision reflected the interconnection of personal diligence with broader legal and social structures, underscoring the seriousness and permanence of the marital bond. Emotional preparation was equally vital, for the transition into marriage demanded the cultivation of patience, empathy, and adaptability. The couple needed to understand not only their own desires, strengths, and limitations, but also those of their partner. Learning to navigate disagreements, anticipate needs, and respond with thoughtfulness and kindness. Emotional literacy became an essential skill, exercised daily in interactions that ranged from shared meals and household routines to intimate conversations and moments of quiet reflection. Even simple gestures, holding hands during a walk, exchanging letters, or offering reassurance during periods of stress were part of the deliberate construction of trust, respect, and mutual understanding. In this way, emotional preparation was inseparable from the practical and social dimensions of marriage. It was through the careful cultivation of empathy, communication, and attentiveness that a couple transformed the formal and sometimes rigid structures of courtship into a living, dynamic partnership capable of sustaining affection, resilience, and shared purpose. Marriage in the Victorian era, therefore, was not a singular event, but an ongoing process. A layered preparation that encompassed legal awareness, social sophistication, and emotional maturity. The ceremony itself, with its vows, rings, and public acknowledgement, was merely the visible culmination of months or even years of deliberate cultivation, negotiation, and training in the arts of domestic management, social performance, and relational intelligence. Within this framework, love and partnership were inseparable from responsibility, understanding, and foresight, illustrating that enduring marriages were built not solely on passion, but on a foundation of careful preparation, mutual respect, and a sustained effort required to harmonize personal desire with social duty and emotional insight. In appreciating these practices, we can glimpse how the deliberate and structured approach to marriage in the Victorian period created relationships that, though constrained by etiquette and social expectation, were capable of profound connection, resilience, and fulfillment lessons that continue to resonate for anyone seeking to understand the intricate interplay of love, responsibility, and partnership. While Victorian courtship and marriage might appear, from a modern perspective, to be rigid, formal, and at times almost excessively constrained by social codes, the very structure that enforced these boundaries also created fertile ground for the development of trust, mutual respect, and enduring partnership. The meticulous rules, the careful pacing of interactions, and the attention to propriety were not merely arbitrary limitations. They functioned as a framework within which individuals could explore character, intentions, and emotional depth without the chaos, uncertainty, or impulsiveness that might otherwise jeopardize both personal and social stability. By embedding expectations, etiquette, and social observation into the very fabric of courtship, the system allowed couples to cultivate discernment, empathy, and patience, qualities that formed the bedrock of relationships, capable of lasting beyond the fleeting intensity of first attraction. In practice, this meant that every meeting, gesture, or conversation became an opportunity to witness and understand the character of the other person, observing how a prospective husband treated his family, his servants, or even strangers, or noting the subtle attentiveness and grace with which a prospective wife navigated social interaction, provided essential insights into values, temperament, and compatibility. His carefully curated observations, repeated over weeks and months of structured interaction, encouraged both parties to form judgments not only about superficial qualities, but about the deeper aspects of integrity, responsibility, and moral sensibility. Over time, this slow, deliberate process enabled trust to grow organically, nurtured by knowledge and insight, rather than assumed or superficially claimed. Partners learned to rely on one another, not merely through romantic declaration, but through the consistent demonstration of thoughtfulness, honesty, and mutual attentiveness, and in doing so, the very rigidity of the system became a crucible in which emotional connection, reliability, and shared understanding were forged. Mutual respect, likewise, was cultivated through the constraints of etiquette and expectation, by requiring measured speech, attentiveness to the needs and comfort of others, and the careful management of appearance, behavior, and domestic responsibilities. The system reinforced the importance of valuing the other person's perspectives, desires, and boundaries. Respect was not only a social performance, but a lived practice, exercised daily through acts both large and small, from accommodating each other's routines and preferences to navigating disagreements with consideration and patience. These repeated demonstrations of attentiveness and deference, grounded in societal norms yet personally interpreted, laid the groundwork for the mutual regard that would sustain long-term partnership, allowing couples to transition from the performative rigor of courtship to the genuine collaboration and emotional intimacy of marriage. Moreover, the slow evolution from initial meeting to engagement and ultimately to marriage allowed relationships to develop on a foundation of careful understanding rather than impulse. Couples became intimately aware of each other's strengths, weaknesses, and idiosyncrasies, learning to appreciate differences, negotiate challenges, and celebrate compatibilities. The time vows were exchanged and households merged. Partners were not entering blindly, but stepping forward with knowledge, awareness, and deliberate commitment. The formalities and strictures that once seemed cumbersome thus revealed themselves as instruments that enabled partners to cultivate a profound sense of security, reliability, and mutual confidence, a rare combination that supported both emotional well-being and practical stability across the unpredictable demands of daily life. In this way, Victorian courtship and marriage, for all their apparent rigidity, achieved something remarkable. They provided a structured, intentional environment in which trust could flourish, respect could be consistently practiced, and long-term relationships could be established with a clarity of expectation and a depth of understanding that remains impressive even by today's standards. The lessons embedded in this system, the value of observation, its patience, deliberate communication, and the careful integration of social, legal, emotional preparation, demonstrate that constraints, far from being purely limiting, can serve as the scaffolding upon which enduring love, partnership, and mutual growth are built, revealing the enduring wisdom of a practice that transformed societal expectations into the enduring architecture of human connection. As we step back from the intricate web of Victorian courtship and married life, it becomes clear that the world of 1850s romance was far more than a series of formalities and rituals. It was a carefully constructed framework that shaped not only how men and women approached love, but also how they learned to live, communicate, and grow together. Dating in the 1850s was governed by strict etiquette, a set of invisible yet universally understood rules that dictated even the smallest interactions. From the subtle lift of a hat to the fleeting exchange of glances, each gesture carrying weight, intention, and meaning. A casual misstep, an ill-chosen word, an untimely gift, or a misunderstood signal could ripple outward, affecting reputation and social standing, reminding every young person that courtship was not merely personal, but deeply entwined with family, society, and morality. Daily life for Victorian women, in particular, was a delicate balance between social expectation and personal endurance. Physically restrictive clothing, notably the ubiquitous corset, shaped not only the body, but the very way a woman moved through her day, a constant reminder that fashion, propriety, and societal ideals were inseparable from the rhythms of life. Mornings were meticulously structured, beginning with laborious dressing and hairstyling routines, followed by household tasks, letter writing, music practice, and social preparation, all undertaken without the comfort of central heating and under the weight of heavy garments. Even the smallest comforts were scarce, yet each day was imbued with purpose and a silent discipline, teaching patience, resilience, and an appreciation for subtle attention to detail skills that would serve them well in the delicate negotiations of courtship and, eventually, marriage. Courtship itself was an exercise in careful observation and emotional literacy. Meetings were formal and often observed by family members, creating an environment where conversation, manners, and character were constantly scrutinized. Gentlemen and ladies communicated not only through words, but through gestures, posture, and attentiveness, mastering a language of subtle signals that conveyed interest, respect, and emotional nuance without breaching the boundaries of propriety. Social rituals, including visits, tea parties, and weather calls, provided structured settings to assess compatibility, while discussions of upbringing, education, and future prospects offered insight into ambition, values, and temperament. Serving behavior towards servants and parents revealed character in ways that polite conversation could not, demonstrating that emotional intelligence, empathy, and moral awareness were as important as charm and beauty. The exchange of small gifts, flowers, locks of hair, or carefully chosen photographs further enriched these interactions. Each token carried symbolic meaning, a tangible representation of affection, consideration, and intention, yet always circumscribed by social norms designed to prevent impropriety. These gestures, though restrained, cultivated a subtle intimacy that would grow over time, providing a foundation for emotional connection that was both delicate and enduring. When courtship evolved into formal engagement, the stakes deepened. Proposals were serious, legally binding, and socially significant, requiring thoughtful deliberation from both partners. Engagement allowed for slightly more intimate interactions, such as supervised hand-holding, while correspondence and personal conversations offered a space to explore hopes, fears, and dreams with greater honesty, building trust, understanding, and shared anticipation for the life to come. Marriage, then, was not a sudden leap, but the culmination of this deliberate, structured process. Newlyweds faced the challenge of managing households, navigating social expectations, and integrating daily routines, all while cultivating emotional intimacy and mutual understanding. Gradually, physical closeness and emotional attunement developed alongside practical cooperation in career adjustments, child rearing, and domestic management. The slow, intentional rhythm of Victorian life allowed couples to build a partnership rooted not only in affection, but in reliability, respect, and shared responsibility, demonstrating that true connection often grows from patience, attentiveness, and the careful observation of character over time. Ultimately, the lessons of Victorian courtship and marriage resonate far beyond the era of corsets and candlelit parlors. Despite its rigidity, the system fostered trust, mutual respect, long-term relationship foundations, proving that structure, when thoughtfully applied, can nurture love, intimacy, and resilience. The deliberate pace encouraged self-reflection, emotional literacy, and an appreciation for the complexity of human relationships, reminding us that enduring partnership is rarely spontaneous. It is cultivated through attention, patience, and care. As we drift away from the candlelit rooms, the carefully observed gestures, and the whispered letters of 1850s courtship, it is worth remembering that even in a world of strict rules and heavy expectations, love found ways to grow, flourish, and endure. For the Victorian approach, with all its discipline and deliberation, offers a timeless lesson that the foundations of lasting connection are built slowly, thoughtfully, and with an unwavering respect for both oneself and one's partner. So, as you settle into your own cozy bed, allow the stories of careful glances, symbolic gifts, and deliberate steps toward love to drift softly through your thoughts, and may the gentle rhythm of history lull you into peaceful slumber. Good night, and sleep well.